off with her head. That's the response you can get these days for sharing your political opinion. Yet here I am bringing you a report on who I believe is the top 2 candidates trying to become the next leader of the BC Conservatives. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, bringing you a sort of wrap-up report to my coverage of the BC leadership race. You can find those reports at bcleadershipreports.com. And after this, you'll just see my election night coverage, where the leader themselves will be announced this coming Saturday. Now, that leader won't just be the leader of the party. I believe it's quite possible they may be the next premier of this province. So a pretty important race, which is why I don't take letting you know who I think is the top 2 lightly. I've already brought you balanced coverage of all candidates, where I asked them all hard questions and I gave them all opportunity to tell you why they think you should vote for them. And may I remind you of this? It's a picture of me endorsing John Rustad. Yet, not too long after, I would think I was probably giving reports that were holding him to account stronger than maybe any other journalist who is one that typically reports on conservative news. You let me know if you disagree. My point is, no matter who becomes the leader, I will be there to bring you important coverage that holds them both accountable to their conservative leadership and what's best for the province. Okay, now that disclaimer is out of the way, let's talk about who is actually running. In case you missed it, there's 5 candidates. We have former BC Liberal Ian Black. He was also a minister with the party. We have the only sitting MLA with the BC Conservatives, formerly a BC Liberal, Peter Millibar. We have Caroline Elliott, the former vice president for the BC Liberals. We have Carrie Lynn Finley, a former federal Conservative MP and minister. And we have Yuri Fulmer, a philanthropist and businessman. And now for the moment you've been waiting for, drum roll. I believe the candidate that ticks off the most boxes for BC is in fact Carrie Lynn Finley. But why? Well, let's start with the biggest concern for British Columbians, and that's whether or not our property rights are secure thanks to Aboriginal title decisions and agreements that have undermined them. And it's great to see that all candidates are united in their pledge to repeal DRIPA, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which is just a start, which is why I've also asked all of them what they would do after that. And you can again find that at bcleadershipreports.com and support our coverage there if you'd like. But when you look at the resumes of who is best fit, it seems, to take on that fight, it's certainly not Peter Millibar, the former mayor of Kamloops, which we now know has had an Aboriginal claim on it for a decade, including when he was the mayor. And that is speaking for the entire city of Kamloops. Again, private property. We didn't hear much from him. In fact, he voted in DRIPA. I'm not going to completely hold that against him, because so did everybody else who was a BC Liberal at that time. But if you're representing people in Kamloops, and you still are as an MLA, and right now you have no excuse for saying you never knew about this Aboriginal title claim. I think you should be the loudest voice right now on behalf of those constituents. And I'm really not hearing him stand out of the crowd of conservatives when it comes to these concerns. So Caroline Elliott, she's been strong on calling out DRIPA, calling out what I call reconciliation overreach, in particular, this treatment of Canadians who are not Indigenous as lesser than. She's done a great job at that. But her resume doesn't compare to Carrie Lynn Finley's, who actually has had some successes fighting as a lawyer on behalf of land rights for Canadians that are not under a banned government. Here's her talking about that now.
I was involved as both a neighbor and a litigator in the Musqueam dispute in the late 90s into 2000, the leaseholder dispute there. And for many years, the people there they lost all equity out of their homes. They couldn't mortgage, they couldn't refinance, because appraisers could not give a fair market value under Aboriginal governance, and that matter went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. The leaseholders did win that, but that was 25 years ago, and that has been mostly buried in the sands of time. So I understand this issue very well, because myself and many others in that community lost our homes to an Aboriginal land dispute. And when right now Musqueam First Nation and the federal government says we're not coming after your title, whether they're after the title per se or not matters very little if all equity is sucked out of your holdings. Mm-hmm. And this is a confiscation of assets.
And what about freedom? May I remind you of the COVID-19 era, where we had a two-tier system and no leaders, essentially, I should say next to none, willing to take a stand against it? Well, it appears Carrie Lynn Finley was at least willing to show face for those who were fighting for that cause.
The Freedom Convoy, which actually started here in BC, and I saw them off at the Delta truck stop there.
I was there too that foggy morning, and I couldn't believe how many were coming from this area.
Yeah, early in the morning, and we followed them out as far as Hope and then wished them well on their way. And then, of course, I was at the other end in Ottawa, and it was one of the very few times that I stayed back in Ottawa. Normally, I always came home every weekend, but there was a 3-week period there where I stayed back literally to bear witness, because I could see that the mainstream media was just torquing what was happening in a very negative way, and it wasn't real.
Carrie Lynn Finley was there. That's mad street cred when it comes to that, especially in a province that held on to our vaccine mandates against healthcare workers as our healthcare system was totally strapped and in need, still is. And they held on to it longer than anybody else in the country, and were one of 3 jurisdictions to hang on to it left in the world. And they even did this bogus motion here where you had BC Liberals and NDP alike voting in favor of vaccine mandates. Well, here you see Carrie Lynn Finley claim that she never supported such.
Did you support vaccine passports during COVID-19 lockdowns?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And unlike Ian Black, where we saw him say he didn't really think he supported them, but then the Twitter critters found all the times he was liking sort of pro-lockdown things and put that on social media. Or Caroline Elliott, who, well, said this previously.
And I think that here it's not making sense to people. I mean, the whole point of vaccine mandates, as we all know, is to protect the most vulnerable. So you have teachers in this case in a confined space with what is essentially our largest unvaccinated population, which is our kids. And there's no vaccine mandate coming from the province. As Unina said, the government's always one step behind. And yet government is comfortable doing a vaccine mandate for 30,000 public service workers. They're encouraging vaccine mandates for places like BC Hydro, where many of their contractors and employees work in relative isolation. But then when it comes to our kids in a confined space for hours of a day, we're not seeing similar action. And Nina's point about the fact that the school boards are elected officials. They're in regions, many of them, where the vaccine uptake has not been particularly high. And there's a risk that those are the very regions where we need it most, where they may not get that kind of mandate.
But another big issue is who's going to unite the fractured conservative movement. Now, we all know Yuri Fulmer has partnered with a deal with One BC. I'll talk about that a little bit more in this video. But who out of the other candidates has a plan? When I sat down and interviewed Finley, she said she didn't agree with Fulmer doing that deal in advance before, having a caucus decision and discussion about it. But she did say she was agreeable to working with with Dallas Brody in some situation, and she had sat down with her already and had discussions, but not a pre-planned sort of thing. But she also said she believes she can unite the independent MLAs. I caught up with independent MLA who represents Peace River North, Jordan Keeley, and this is what he told me.
It's either Kerry or nothing for me. So if Kerry wins, I'll go back to the party. If she doesn't, I'm going to remain an independent and I'm going to represent my riding. I've already gone through the drama of being involved in a party and a leader promising a lot of things and not following through. And I don't want to go through that again. And right now with the other candidates, I just see that happening all over again.
At the end of the day, British Columbia is a mess. We need a strong leader, someone who can lead. And she does have experience leading in different capacities. She was a minister in 2 different roles of doing so for the federal Conservatives. She was a judge who sat on the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, who admits on Rebel News the BC Human Rights Tribunal does, in fact, need to be changed up. It needs to stop being ideological. And so I think those are some of the top reasons I would say that she stands out. But who's number 2? Well, I'm going to go with Yuri Fulmer on this one. And don't come for me in the comments, not that I care if you do. But I saw when I interviewed him, so many people coming at me, oh, Drea, how much is he paying you? I interviewed them all. It's the strangest thing. But why do I say Yuri Fulmer? Because I agree, he's a bit of a wild card, in my opinion. He was woke a minute ago. I mean, here he is doing a land acknowledgement here.
And I'd like to acknowledge the beautiful, warm and thoughtful welcome Elder Delia gave us today. As a settler, I'm as guilty as any of using words like unceded to describe these lands. And unceded is really a very pretty word that actually should be substituted with stolen. We stand today on lands that were stolen from Indigenous people.
But I like the way he responds when you ask him about that.
The reality is, to do business in this province, which I've had to do for 30 years, we had Liberal leadership in the province that really forced it on us. And in fairness, I went along, right? And one of the things that Dallas Brody's reminded me of is she said, Yuri, you're better to come late to church than not to come at all. And so I'd say that to British Columbians. I got a bit duped.
So at least he answers the question head on. I respect that. But I think that the success in business is, again, something that is standing out to me. But in fact, I do think the One BC deal was a little bit of a window into how he thinks. I think he saw an opportunity and he seized it. Some have criticized him saying, oh, he shouldn't have done that before. That wasn't right. Well, he didn't get disqualified, so he must have found a gray area. He saw a need to say, hey, let's not let the same thing happen. In fact, the BC Conservatives cannibalized the BC Liberals. Originally, when the BC Conservatives were initially getting traction and John Rustad and then Bruce Banman came over, the BC United wasn't taking them seriously under Kevin Falcon.
And the BC Conservative Party is not connected to the federal party at all. They're a small fringe party. They've been around for 70 years.
How'd that work out for you, Kevin? They almost won in the last election. You're nowhere to be seen. So I like that Yuri Fulmer isn't treating One BC like a fringe party that's just going to disappear and go away. No, he sees the numbers. He sees the momentum they're getting. He sees that the Conservatives that they represent well should not be ignored or undermined.
The reality is that One BC is polling somewhere between 8 and 11%. And mathematically, if they command that kind of polling in an election, mathematically, Conservatives lose, NDP wins. It's just math. That's not a political view. That's not a judgment. That's pure math.
They might be better to work with than against. And we see this all the time on the left. Provincially, the NDP has no problems voting with the Green and vice versa. Federally, we see the Liberals vote with the NDP and the Quebecois. In fact, that just happened this past week. The federal Conservatives, under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre, brought forth a motion to secure private property rights. And guess what? The Liberals, the NDP, and Quebecois voted it down. So Fulmer sees an opportunity. I think that makes him a strong candidate. As well as this. Look at this. It's a freedom charter that he put together that has great points on it. Here's some of them. Repealing DRIPA, having no mandatory digital ID, religious freedom protections, ban on compelled speech, aka land acknowledgements, I'm assuming, parental rights being secured in schools, also standing up for law-abiding firearms, replacing the Human Rights Tribunal, and merit-based hiring being restored in the province. So I'm a big fan of that charter, and it really stood out to me. Special mention to the 3 candidates who have also said that they would come out and make it unlawful to medically transition gender-confused children, that being Yuri Fulmer, Carrie Lynn Finley, and Caroline Elliott. I hope you appreciated my coverage on this race. We've got the municipal race coming up. So that would be school trustees, mayors, counselors. So stay tuned for some of my reports on that as well. Drea Humphrey for Rebel News. My next report will be bringing you the coverage from Saturday night on who is, in fact, the next leader. If you appreciate that I've had my boots on the ground during this campaign and you want to help support some of the costs to do so, please go to bcleadership.com and donate what you can.